All right. So I don't need to introduce myself because I feel like I've done that a lot already today. So this is one of the points that we always talk about, right? No matter how big your organization is, no matter how much money you may have, everybody always thinks they need more money. So, and I can ask that right now, right here. So, how many of you think you need more money for your organization? Exactly. And what's important when we look at this is if I ask an organization, Jennifer's not in this room, but if you ask LLS, right, who's a $300 million a year organization in the United States, if they need more money,
it's more like 500 to 600 million now.
They will say yes, right? And so just more money is not your answer. All right, so it's really, really thinking about what is it that you want to do? What is it that you want to accomplish? Doesn't matter how big you are, if you have staff, if you don't have staff, doesn't matter how many volunteers you have or how long you've been established. Regardless of all of those characteristics, most people still want to do more. All right? So, let's look at this. Instead, we want you to think about what is it that you actually want to do, right? I often have conversations, and I've worked in the charity sector for a long time, and one of the things when we go through strategic planning processes is in some organizations, not the one I work for, just so we're clear, but in some organizations when they're planning, one of their goals is always, we have to see an increase in fundraising revenue, right? We want to see a 10% increase, a 20% increase. We want to see that increase in dollars. You need to start backwards, and you need to figure out what are the programs that you would like to do first. So why are you offering these programs? Who's going to show up? What are you trying to address? You have to figure out that part of the problem first. Then you can figure out how you're going to fund it. All right? But really, these are some of what you really should be focusing on. Are you trying to reach every person that has CLL? Are you trying to focus on only the newly diagnosed patients? Are you trying to focus on patients that are relapsed and are going through treatments again? Who is it that you're trying to find because you think that they have a certain need that you can address? All right? Where are these people located? Are they all in one big city? Are they all across your country? Are they going to certain hospitals? Especially if you're looking at a relapse refractory population, depending on the treatment, they may only end up in a very limited number of treatment centers, right? Whereas if you're in a watch and wait phase, you could be at a general physician level and not have actually seen a hematologist or any kind of oncology specialist. So you have to figure out what it is you're trying to do and where your audience is located. Who can we work with? Let's be honest, every one of us here has some aims within the CLL patient community, which is why you showed up. So everybody here is doing something, but even if you go back and just look within your own home country, there are lots of other nonprofit organizations. There's no shortage of charities. And some people are doing have similar initiatives, even if they're in another disease. So who else is doing what that you might be able to work with? Often when we're thinking about who we're going to work with, we think of doctors and nurses, which are really important, do not get me wrong. But sometimes you have to look outside of the traditional community to find out who else might be a good partner. Yeah, and who can help you. So if it's within your own patient community or some of those people willing to step up and help in different ways, different kinds of support from corporations, etc. Like there's lots of things we can think about. I'm not going to give you all of the answers right now, but we will have discussions later about these topics. But I just want you to keep this in mind as we're going along. All right. So here's my tribute to the who. Who are you? Is really what you need to figure out first. Everybody here wants to help somebody with CLL. You don't all want to do it the same way or for the same reason. So you need to define as an organization what it is. What is your niche? What is your reason? What is it exactly that you want to do? right? So figure out what that big goal is. You need to figure out who you are. This is not a single step process. You don't do this once and then you're like, okay, I'm done. You have to constantly go back to this and say, are we still valid? Is this still addressing a real need? Is it working? Is it not working? Do we need to rethink this? So once you have your purpose, then you can start looking at all the other components that come into making your organization sustainable. So if you have this purpose that you've decided on, and you have this group over here, so you're going to develop a certain program for patients, do their expectations of you, do they match what you have decided to do? So you may have a great idea as a patient or from talking to a patient, but does it really match a community need where you're going to get a lot of people interacting with the program? If not, you need to go back and relook at your purpose. All right. Again, with the community need, so if you look at the larger community as a whole, are you filling something that is not being taken care of by somebody else? Now, what I say about that is sometimes there are other organizations working in the same area as you, and they're not doing a very good job. And so you're stepping into, it's still then a community need that's valid that you can step into. So it's not just a checklist of somebody is doing this and I'm good. It really is, where can we step in and fill something that's not being done well for our patient community? We're also going to look at engagement. So it may be that you have this great purpose and it meets expectations that you've heard from patients. The community need is there. Nobody shows up. If nobody shows up, this is not working. So you then have to go back and look about what is it that is not working. If they say they want this and that is filled and they're still not showing up, something is still wrong with your purpose. Capacity. This is the biggest issue we find. We all have huge ideas. I'm going to tell you a story that happened last night. And so Natasha, who's leading the session in the other room, works with me at Lymphoma Coalition. And she's based in Spain, I'm based in Canada. We don't get a chance to actually talk face-to-face a lot. We Skype, we do lots of things, but you know, face-to-face is always different. So she and I went out to dinner to catch up on some work. And so we were having this and Natasha's Spanish, she's very exuberant about things, right? Her arms fly and she has lots of ideas and it's all good. And when the two of us get together, there's lots of arms flying and lots of intense, and we end up really close leaning across a table to the point that the gentleman next to us says, you guys might want to tone it back a little bit. Isn't it late at night? You should be relaxing a little bit, and you guys are like intense. So what's good, and I will qualify by saying this, it turned out that his wife has lymphoma. And so we actually ended up in a discussion about patient care. Not only that, he's from Canada, and so I actually have really good, solid information from him. So you never know who you're going to meet, but that's beside the point. So capacity, we all have great ideas, but what can we actually physically do? If you need more volunteers, it's great, but what can you actually do with the people that you have in place right now? We cannot all work 24/7, right? We may want to, we may have the desire to. I know that it's hard sometimes to rein it back, especially when you have a patient in front of you that needs some help. But it still goes to the fact you are no good to anybody if you aren't doing self-care, right? So really capacity is a big deal. And then your impact. What is important to this is you have to see what your measurements are like. You have to be measuring your programs. If it's asking people what they think of them, it's just not looking at numbers who attend, which is an important part, don't get me wrong, but what are they getting out of it? Are you seeing changes in activity or change in action that is helping actually meet that purpose that you've decided? All right. Once you get all of this, which is really around how you're going to support that patient group in your planning, then you have to look at your own organization. So that point, once you've figured out your purpose and how that all works, you're going to look at how your structure is. And yes, funding is going to come into play because we can't do everything we want to do. And part of what that is we're going to have to start analyzing our programs to see what people are willing to support and what they're not willing to support. Your team members, do you have the right people? We have great ideas sometimes, and yet nobody has the skill set needed to actually develop that program. Doesn't mean it can't happen, it just means sometimes you need to recruit other people in with the skill set or put that program on hold until you can find the right people. Infrastructure always comes into play. If you have a home office, do you have a computer system that works? Do you have a central repository where you can share files? All those kinds of details have to be figured out if you're working with multiple people, of course. Your priorities. This is my favorite one, which we all struggle with. You have this list of things you would like to do. How do you figure out what you can do first? And let me tell you, all this other stuff comes into play with setting your priorities, right? So you may think that you may have one program A, that you think will have the biggest impact on patients. But if you don't have the right team members, you don't have the money to do it, and you don't have the infrastructure to support it, then it can't be your priority at that point in time. All right, so it's being really realistic and cognizant when you're doing your planning about what's available to you and what you can do. And measurement, again, I'm a big focus for me is on measurement with everybody asked you. And the reason is when you are going out for funding, you have to be able to prove to people that you're successful, right? And it's one thing to say I have this great program, but if you have 2 people show up, that's not a great program. It may look really, really fancy when you laid it all out on paper and it meets all these different objectives that you think are really important. If nobody comes, it didn't work. So you have to find ways to measure what you're doing. All right. So that's just my opening introduction. We're going to listen to Dr. Neil Graham first. And Neil is from New Zealand. It's a newly formed charity called CLL Advocates New Zealand. Is that correct? Yes. And Neil is a retired, yes. I'm making sure that I have all my facts straight. General practitioner. You're a specialist. Yes. And so he has a different experience in that he was working in the field as a practitioner and then was diagnosed with CLL and realized that there were lots of gaps that needed to be addressed in the patient community in New Zealand. And so they have recently formed a new organization. So he's going to talk about what they did and why they did it and how he's deciding their priorities right now. Okay. Yes, Rita.
Where do you put the strategy in?
So, in my opinion, all of these things are part of your strategy, right? So whenever you're figuring out your purpose, what is your reason for being, right? That's usually like I'll try not to be too long, but your vision for your organization and your mission statement are often your purpose. And through that, then you decide what are the steps I need to take to meet these big goals up here. And that's when you start checking them off and going through all of these different factors and saying this might work, we'll prioritize this, we can get funding for this kind of thing.
It's very hard.
It is very hard. And another time we can do a complete session, if you like, on strategic planning. But we just went through this again with Lymphoma Coalition. And it's not only that it's a hard process, as in it's a lot of work, because it is a lot of work, but it's also a huge amount of discussion because you have obviously usually a group of people within your organization that you have to get together and agree on what the steps are moving forward. And when everybody is really passionate about why they're there and what they're trying to do, that can be a difficult process. And so you have to be really willing to listen, first of all, and really don't take things personally, which is a big struggle for a lot of people. All right, but I agree.